Do you think that growth is incompatible with? Do you think growth as such is like an inherently bad thing? Because I've seen people make this argument, and I understand exactly where they're coming from in terms of like finance, because I think it's Nicholas Shaxson in his book, and it's not his study, but he quotes this figure and it sticks in my mind. I think he said it was 4.3 trillion pounds of growth has been lost by the rest of the economy as a result of this
finance curse.
The finance curse, essentially. It's the principle for anyone that doesn't know, that hasn't listened to my episode with him, go check it out, is that finance has become a drain on the resources in the same way oil or copper or anything like that would be on a developing nation. You see the resource curse in other places, and he sort of points to the finance curse as being just as big a drain on the British economy. But to me, that doesn't inherently mean that growth is a bad thing. Do you disagree?
The argument about growth is that, it's really, okay, so when economists or policymakers talk about growth, the reason they're doing it is because, they think if you can grow the economy, that makes everything easier, right? Mm-hmm. There's more to go around to everyone. Mm-hmm. So instead of talking about dividing the pie between people, if you grow a bigger pie, people can in theory have more. I guess the issue is just kind of bluntly trying to grow the economy through whatever means necessary means that you're using huge amounts of resources, which we know we live on a planet which can't support infinite extraction of resources and infinite growth. You're using more than the planet can support in order to support this growth. But also, growth isn't actually very good at meeting the kind of objectives or goals you have as a policymaker or as a society. So the best way of fixing problems with the economy or with people's living standards isn't just growing the economy. It's about directly fixing and tackling those problems, whereas growth is seen as a kind of indirect way of doing that. If you just grow the economy enough, we'll trickle down and everyone will be better. But we know that leads to environmental degradation, that leads to huge inequality. There's a range of reasons why you might disagree with growth, and there are a lot of counter arguments too. But either way, I think most people can agree GDP as a concept is a very bad measure, and it isn't very useful. It doesn't really tell us that much. There's that famous member of the public said to, I think it was Andy Haldane, the chief economist at the Bank of England, when he was making a speech about growth and saying, we've had 10% growth over the last 10 years or something. And a member of the audience stands up and says, well, that's your growth. We haven't experienced any of that because growth, GDP of the whole country doesn't tell you much. Especially if it's all concentrated in London, doesn't tell us much about what people's lives are like outside of, in places which are left behind and are, seeing their living standards fall. So it's a very crude measure and, doesn't tell us much about things that, you can't put a price on. Like the things that really matter, right? Like, well-being and things like, the domestic labour and things like that. They're not included in growth statistics, but those are some of the most important things that we need as a society to function. So I would say it's a poor measure, and focusing on it. And I guess where we come into it is, the fact that we're dependent on growth because of the way our policy institution or policy making works. If we were to have a recession, so a fall in growth, people would be unemployed because there isn't that safety net otherwise. So we want to talk more about having an economy which is less dependent on growth, and we can meet people's needs without relying on growing the economy and therefore wrecking the planet or causing inequality. So I guess we originally came at it from looking at the financial system and how basically debt creates a growth imperative. So if you create lots of debt, you need to be able to pay off that debt, and you pay off that debt by extracting more resources and exploiting more of people's labour in order to pay off the debt. So you need a bigger economy to pay off the debt. So finance can create that growth imperative. So that's kind of, I guess, a broad kind of brush of, I guess, where we're coming from when we're talking about growth and potentially the issues of it.
I guess maybe this is like a too idealistic a view of it, but my hope is that it's like, for example, there's a lot of talk in America and also in Britain about this idea of the Green New Deal, which I'm broadly in favor of. Like, I like the idea that we could take the power of state spending and use it to invest in, say, electrification of railways, expanding public transport, put in solar panels on every available space that you can find. I do not understand why that is not priority number one. And people talk about spending on climate change related things, and I'm just like, the government could literally just decide that 40% of their budget was on solar panels. And for me, that still would be growing the economy, but not in an extractive way.
So I see the argument, people talk about, differentiating between different kinds of growth. Right? You can have particularly extractive and, harmful growth in terms of, we're just growing the economy as it is, which is dependent on fossil fuels. If, we could talk about, growth in green kind of alternatives, that would be better, right? There are some things we need to grow. Like, we need to grow our capacity to respond to the climate crisis and the social crises facing us as well. But, the way we do that is not through a generalized growth of the economy, because that will always create more kind of pressure on the environment. Even like solar panels, for instance, those have a huge environmental, lots of green technologies, rely on extracting these rare earth minerals from the global south. And, for instance, people talk about electric cars. Well, from what I've heard, it would require double the amount of cobalt we have on this planet to just replace every petrol car with an electric car. So I think there are kind of these fantasists who, Elon Musk style people. I mean, I don't want to disparage. You might be a fan of him. I don't know.
I think he's a net good.
Okay, fair enough. But I feel like he's a kind of this utopian technologicalist, who thinks, we can just, have technology, new forms of technology to maintain our current system. And I think, we need to actually talk about changing our ways of life as well as, you can't just rely on technology. We do need to change our system, and so it's less, wasteful and more sustainable.
The one thing I would say is there's a cool bit of tech coming out of China at the minute that is a cobalt-free battery, which is has the potential now. So I think it's just they're working on. They've got prototypes out, and they don't have the full. It's not in production yet. But instead of being a wound battery, it's a square one that allows for far more ventilation, and it's cobalt free. So that's the kind of technology that I would look at. That would be hopefully allowing us to grow in a non-damaging way, essentially. But so Positive Money would advocate for trying to invest in these industries with quite a substantial amount of money. And one of the things that I've seen Positive Money advocate for is using the power of quantitative easing to fund spending on transforming our economy. Do you want to give people an idea of what quantitative easing is?
Sure.
And then how that would work in terms of trying to use that power to spend on infrastructure rather than pumping money into the top of the stock market?
So, I mean, quantitative easing can begin to get quite complicated quite quickly. I mean, the Bank of England, that they really recently, got told by an independent evaluation that they don't understand quantitative easing.
What?
Or they fail to communicate how it works.
Okay.
Because it is, a relatively new policy tool, and the scale that's been done on recently is, quite unprecedented, and no one really can claim to fully understand all the effects, because there are various theories as to how it works, and various kind of second order effects and consequences that can come from it, and these can be debated. But I can try and explain practically what it means. So quantitative easing. So when the government borrows money, it issues bonds. These bonds are usually bought by the private sector, so pension funds or other financial institutions. So what quantitative easing involves is the Bank of England creating new money to buy these bonds from these companies. So instead of these companies having government bonds, they now have a load of cash, basically. And the idea is that this would, injecting all of this new money would increase asset prices, so increase the value of these bonds, which would make, first of all, there's this kind of wealth effect, trickle down effect. And the Bank of England's explained it in this way before itself, make the holders, the people who previously or hold government bonds, feel wealthier. And people who hold assets like property in general feel wealthier because there's now more money in the system pushing up asset prices. So they would potentially spend more or invest more because they are wealthier. They feel they're more able to do that. A kind of second related channel to this is the portfolio rebalancing effect. So the idea that these companies, like pension funds, for example, no longer have these bonds on their balance sheet. They've got a load of cash. So they're going to reinvest the cash in something else. So the idea is that cash might get invested into something useful or productive, which would boost the economy. The problem there is that, if they can no longer invest in government bonds, they'll invest in something equally safe, like property. So it means, a lot more money flowing to financial speculation or property markets rather than the money actually trickling down to the economy. So it's basically based on this. It's a kind of trickle down economics. The Bank of England basically floods financial markets with hundreds of billions of pounds of new money, with the hope that this money leads to people shifting their portfolios around, investing in different things, and eventually that will reach the real economy. Or people feeling wealthier, people who have assets, going out and spending because they feel wealthier. So that kind of wealth effect, trickle down economics.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment for us in the comments below. Let me know what you thought and if you'd like to see more of this from the show. Thank you, and we'll see you again next time.